Here we go. Here we go. All right. The meeting of the Board of Education for June 25th, 2024 is now called to order. All items being considered this evening are posted on the PPS website under the Board and Meeting tabs. This meeting is being streamed live on PPS TV website and on Channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. Good evening and welcome, everyone. Tonight, following a consent agenda, we will have an update on the Center for Black Student Excellence, a report from the Climate Crisis Response Committee, and an update on the implementation of the Climate Crisis Response Policy. Finally, we will have a discussion on the timing of the next general obligation bond measure. So we'll start off with consent agenda. Board, we will now vote on the consent agenda. If there's any items you would like to pull for discussion, we will set those aside for the next meeting time. Ms. Bradshaw, are there any changes to the consent agenda?
No.
All right, board members, are there any other items you would like to pull? All right, do I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Director Scott, Director DePass. Any board discussion on the consent agenda? All right, hearing none. The board will now vote on resolution 6927 through 6930 and 6932 through 6935. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All right. All opposed? Hearing none. No abstentions. Consent agenda is approved by a vote of 5-0. 6. I wasn't counting myself. 6-0. All right, next update.
One quick question, comment. Just nothing about, just really quick about, I just want to thank staff for putting the SMART goals in the contracts. I think those are awesome.
Same. We noted that as we looked at I did print it out. Sorry, climate people. But yeah, I appreciate that, to see the goals embedded is a great positive move. Thank you.
All right, so.
Oh, yeah, and one other thing besides SMART goals, you also, you could go and look at what everybody had done last year. And that was pretty amazing. And now we'll be able to come with the SMART goals. We'll actually be able to compare and see if there's change. Very much appreciated.
Anybody else have any discussion? Okay. Next update is on the Center for Black Student Excellence. Superintendent Dr. Armstrong, would you like to introduce this item?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair Hollins. I am extremely proud to introduce Dr. Cheryl Proctor, who is joining us online, the Deputy Superintendent of Instruction and School Communities. Aaron Frazier, the Executive Director of the Center for Black Excellence, who are here to provide an update to the board.
Good evening, everyone. To our board directors and our student representative, thank you so much for having us this evening to provide an update. I believe our slides would be controlled there with Kara. Are they visible in the room for everyone to see?
Not yet, they're working on it.
Great, thank you.
I think all our board members have them, right?
They're in board book.
Okay.
I got them.
All right. Well, we have them, so if you guys want to go ahead and start while they figure it out.
Yes, that's fine. I'll go ahead and start. Great, so I have the slides here before me, and so this is going to be our presentation. As you know, we like to periodically provide updates to the board, and where we are currently is that we have formulated the Center for Black Excellence Board of Directors, and we have listed on the slide the names and individuals who are currently a part of the board. It's important to note that it has been the intention to have our PPS superintendent always serve on the board, and starting next month for the next board meeting in July, we are pleased to have our new superintendent, Dr. Kimberly Armstrong, who will be joining the board at that time. And so the Center for Black Excellence has hired and staffed for their executive director, Ms. Erin Frazier, and you will be hearing from Erin a little later. There are some vacancies that they're still working through. Well, we have some vacancies that we are, working through for the Center for Black Student Excellence. We are looking for a director and also a program manager. And so, we look forward to filling those positions and continuing on with the work and moving it forward. On the Center for Black Excellence side, in addition to hiring their executive director, Erin Frazier, they do have some initial staffing goals, which is to look at a hiring of a deputy director, a development officer, administrative staff, and policy specialists. And so we're also looking at the possibility of site selection and space for programming. And it really is grounded in the vision that we worked so diligently on during the 2022-2023 school year and finalized over the course of a number of engagement activities with our community and our stakeholders. And the visioning really spoke about the Center for Black Student Excellence being a place, an approach, and embedded in some of our system shifts as PPS so that we can, I'm on slide 4, so that we as PPS can advance the outcomes for the experiences, improve upon the experiences, and advance the outcomes for our Black students. And so we're looking for a resource hub where we could have programs, multi-use spaces, spaces for students to gather, for affinity groups, for staff to gather for professional development, and community members to gather to facilitate honest discussions and engagement. So we are hoping that the Center for Black Student Excellence will be a hub for the community, in addition to providing resources for our PPS students and staff alike. Moving to the next slide, some of what we're looking at specifically is a programming space for a pre-K-5 learning lab. So the notion is that this pre-K-5 learning lab will serve as an incubator to test and share effective classroom practices and resources that will be supplemental to ensure that we are curating culturally affirming classroom experiences for students with space, with curated curriculum, resources, and also empower our families to support their child's academic endeavors as they continue to grow throughout our system. And going to the next slide, we are looking at the possibility and we are working with our school modernization teams to have some discussion about what does the spacing look like? What is design? What does the design and the appropriate equitable design of this space need to be in order to serve both as a community hub for programming, community engagement, and at the same time to house our pre-K-5 learning lab at the CBSE. And we have looked and examined, with our partners, what would be the great model for this pre-K-5 learning lab, and we have identified Kairos PDX as that space where we will curate from learning practices and identify professional development and learning labs to occur in partnership with Kairos PDX. And we are beginning conversations to really outline exactly what that could look like. Going to the next slide. Current priorities that we have been working on this year, we have a number of design teams that have been engaged around culture in the classroom. And it really is looking at instruction and our schools and looking at how it is that we are partnering with our Black and Native communities to identify strategies that will result in more data-driven, culturally affirming, and deeply engaging learning experiences for students. And culture in the classroom is very tightly aligned to our instructional framework, where in the instructional framework we speak about ensuring that our instruction is not only grade level standards aligned, but culturally affirming and data-driven and deeply engaging. So culture in the classroom, this focus that we've had this year, really targets specifically the culturally affirming and deeply engaging elements there. We are also started the work this year regarding emanating from the home, which is looking at how we can revisit and reimagine, if you will, or reframe our parent and caregiver engagement through excellence and consortium building. The staff has partnered with parents and caregivers of Black students and the CBOs to design programming for affinity and capacity building. Going to the next slide. Additionally, our design teams are also, as I mentioned, I touched on, is looking at student affinity groups. We want to be able to look at how we can build and develop our students through creating spaces where they could come together, explore leadership and identity development so that they have a strong sense of who they are, the direction and where they aspire to go, and a space where they can generate not just these ideas for themselves and for their own lives, but also they can contribute deeply into what it looks like within a broader community. And so, we're looking at standards for characteristics of an appropriate advisor to support these spaces. We're exploring pathways to recruit a representative advisor if one isn't already, naturally occurring within the school site, and identifying additional district level supports as we build this out. And the next slide, I will turn it over to the executive director for the Center for Black Excellence, and that is Ms. Erin Frazier.
Thank you. Does this work? Oh, it is working. So first, I've met a lot of you one-on-one. I've been to a lot of your meetings and seen the rest of you several times, but it is great to finally be in this formal discussion with you all. So I am an attorney by training, which means that I really like information. I like to read documents, and I like to talk to people, be those interviews or something a little less formal. And what that means is that after I moved here towards the end of January, I really undertook what I describe as a sort of informal landscape assessment, where I spoke with nearly, in those months I've spoken with probably 100 or so different leaders and members of community-based organizations, educators within PPS and in surrounding school districts, as well as parents, students, and really anybody else who wanted to sit down for coffee with me. Through those discussions, I've sort of seen three primary themes arise about what space the Center for Black Excellence should occupy here in Portland. And the first is that of a resource connector and continuum builder. that of an accountability arm, and then finally as a communication and information sharing facilitator. And if we go to the next slide, I'll say a little bit more about each of those. That's actually not on the next slide, but I'll still say a little more about each of those. So in terms of resource connection and continuum building, think of the resource connection on a micro individual level. So how do we understand what already exists here, because there's a lot of it, and make sure that individual students are in fact being connected with what they need and what we are already providing. On that continuum building piece, that's a little bit more macro. How do we make sure that from pre-K to post-secondary education, students who we know needed particular supports, for example, in kindergarten, get the right ones when they move to first grade and when they go on to middle school and high school? And how do we make sure that those different entities, be they based in the school district or community-based organizations, are speaking with each other so that we are handing students off rather than just funneling them forward? So how do we kind of do those three things? And well, the CBE approach that I have settled on is thinking about building a system of care. And CARE is an acronym that stands for Community, Accountability, Resilience, and Empowerment. So on that community piece, what we're hoping to do through the CBE is provide avenues for connection and facilitate clear communication between students, families, educators, and service providers. When we think about accountability, we're hoping to, one, create that culture of accountability by activating a community of experts, right? People who are in classrooms, who've been in schools, who dig deep into the research around what works best for Black students, and really rely on that and hold people to that. And then the second piece of accountability, right, is advocating on behalf of students and those people who comprise their sort of extended support systems. If we go to the next slide, there is more information on resilience and empowerment. So how do we build resilient kids? Well, first, we've already got them, right? But how do we enhance that? And so first, by relying on research-based interventions. And then secondly, by connecting students to those resources they need to thrive in and out of the classroom. And then on that empowerment piece, really trying to just put a focus on civic and cultural education and exposure to Black leaders and dreamers so that students can really feel like they are capable of anything, which we know, but we just need to encourage. So the next slide will speak a bit about, there's a duplicate, a next slide after that, and that. So if we're talking about CBE priorities, that's really the question of how do we build a system of care, right? Because it's frankly just another fun phrase to throw around without something more concrete to it. And I've spent a lot of time getting to know you all's already existing fun phrases. So if we're talking about putting meat on these bones, the first is to build a digital infrastructure. And that is something that was already present in the CBSE vision document that PPS created. And so thinking about how do we use all of the technology that exists before us in 2024 to make it so that it's not just kids, being advertised whatever the next product is to buy that's making use of all this power of AI, but rather making sure that students and their families know exactly what is on offer, are aware of enrollment deadlines before they've passed or before they are about to pass, and getting kids connected to everything that's already here. In so doing, I think it'll also help us to understand what is missing once we have that clear catalog. The second priority is identifying and advocating for best practices, and I think that this really will feed off of and complement what Dr. Proctor already discussed via that culture in the classroom work that's been being done throughout this past year. And thinking about, again, what do people already know works? We don't really have to reinvent this wheel. A lot of folks have spent a lot of time and money figuring it out. And so now it's our job to figure out how to actually get that to happen in everybody's classroom. The third is a focus on transition years. So we know that while every year matters, some end up being where we see more of those disparities grow. So thinking about that third grade year, that fifth grade year, that transition into high school, and then what I think of as a very long post-secondary transition, right, that starts in 10th grade and goes until graduation, to make sure that students are not only going to graduate, but are going to be ready to compete with every other student across this country and across the world for not just acceptance into universities, but scholarships and funding. And to the extent that they want to choose a career track instead, are prepared with the best licensing and the best credentials to actually enter the workforce and make more than a living wage. On that next slide, it'll list those last 3 priorities for our first few years. The fourth is facilitating data sharing and transparency. So working with community partners to understand and with the school district to understand what is the data that's already there and how can we better use it, how can we make sure that we're all aligned on what the ideal outcomes are and make sure we're moving forward together. The fifth is centralizing communication systems. And that looks like everything from regular newsletters that are going to provide some of that information about enrollment deadlines and opportunities that exist in community and within schools, to events calendars that make it so that people know not just when the next board meeting is and what's happening at it, but also what the other events are that are happening in the community that already are providing some of that civic education and cultural exposure, if we can get that information to students. And then finally, we're thinking a lot about convenings. How do we bring community together? And we'll do this through the facilitation of regularly scheduled convenings of what I describe as groups of peers, to develop policy priorities and empower folks to advance those for themselves. And those groups of peers that we think of are Black leaders across industries, Black leaders within the education space, and then parents, students, and educators. And similarly, I think those latter 3 categories in particular complement that work around student affinity and the parent and caretaker consortium that Dr. Proctor spoke of earlier. And so with this, I think I'll pass that back to Dr. Proctor for some next steps for you all to be able to consider.
Okay, if we could go to the next slide that describes some next steps. Yeah, so we will, with that, PPS will work. We have, again, to continue the work to fill our vacant positions. I think it's really important for us to, as the CBSE and the CBE continue to work together side by side, that we ensure that we have staffing to support this work and moving forward. CBE will continue to refine its vision and develop partnerships, continued partnerships with PPS and also CBOs to further implementation of its strategies. And we expect to announce more engagement opportunities coming this fall. And that concludes our presentation, and we'll just pause to see if there are any questions.
Any questions?
I had a couple questions. One, I noticed on the board of directors that we have board members. Is there some succession planning so there's so we don't ever lose people from the board representing? That's just one question you can answer later. I was curious if the campuses, is that going to be one campus with 2 buildings on it, 141,000 and 148,000 square feet, or is that, conceived as like one building, or what does that look like physically? My last question was whether we'd if you'd contacted Friends of the Children and Tracy Rossi.
I have not, but I will.
Because they are, so that was, Friends of the Children was founded by Duncan Campbell, a Jefferson High School grad. It's a now national program that identifies kids in the first grade and provides them with an adult friend for 12 years. So they have to commit for 12 years. And I know about the program because my brother committed for 25 years to be a friend, and they assign an adult with 6 kids, you know, and there's no specific programming, but it's really to provide the hand-holding and extra support outside of the home. So Friends of the Children, Tracy Rossi. And then I was just, concerned, what is this, what are the building, what's the place look like?
Well, that is, you know, a great question, and we are working closely with the school modernization team to take the steps to look at acquisition and design and all of the phases. Everything is still very preliminary at this point, but initially the idea would be to have a location where the two spaces will come together. Whether it's two buildings on one space or all encompassed in one building, we haven't gotten there yet, but we definitely are in the process of exploring and looking at what's possible, and then building a structured plan and design for it.
Thank you. So it's a still concept. There's no thing there yet.
Correct.
There's no rendering
Correct.
of a single building or something, but it may be a scattered site or on a campus.
Yes. Yeah, not necessarily scattered site, but we do have a vision to try to keep it as a hub, and together with the Pre-K-5 Learning Lab and the Center for Black Student Excellence. However, there are multiple steps that are still in play and need to happen before we're able to really get firm on a full design.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
I have one, Gary. So is there any work with students going on right now without a structure to be in, like outreach to schools? Is any of that going on now?
Yes.
Well, the work that, you want to go ahead, Erin? You want to jump in there?
Are you, I guess because you're looking at me, I thought the question was directed here. Yes,
Oh.
I know. On my end, to the extent that that's happened, it's just been trying to get a sense of what is going on within schools. So it's been, again, in that landscape assessment space. But Dr. Proctor, back to you.
Yeah, definitely. I could add as well. So we are currently engaging with students and with those design teams that were outlined. We are using a combination of our current PPS spaces like schools and such, in addition to community spaces that are available through our partnerships to house and to be the venue, if you will, for many of the engagement activities. So there are spaces that we are utilizing within PPS and throughout the community. And then once we have moved forward with a full design and the actual physical space for the CBSE, we would be able to use that then as the hub. But that is, again, some time down the road in the future, as there are multiple steps that need to occur before we get to design.
And even then, when you're a hub, you'll still be having feelers out different parts of the community. Okay.
Yeah, I could still see that as possible as well, because again, this is really about deeply engaging an entire community in full consideration of what our dreams and aspirations are for our children, and how we can all work together to improve their experiences and their outcomes.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions?
Thanks for the presentation. I love the building a system of care. It seems like it covers those aspects of the student experience and the system around them that will hopefully change their trajectory for many of our students. So I love that. I had a question, and this is more just trying to understand like how it works. And on, let's see if I have a specific slide. I'm glad there's somebody else who really likes paper. There is sorry, I gotta find the slide. Slide 5 that is referencing the PK to 5 Learning Lab, or Kairos. And I'm curious, it says, the Center for Black Student Excellence serves as an incubator to test and share effective classroom management and instructional practices, source supplemental materials, find resources to curate culturally affirming classrooms, spaces, and empower families. How does that get translated into like all the other schools? I'm just trying to envision, is that happening at one school, and then the center actually has educators where they're out sharing the curated practices, sort of like teachers on special assignments, or how exactly does that move from
That's a great question.
one classroom or set of classrooms into the broader? We know that most of our schools have students that we'd be trying to reach, so I'm curious how that works.
Yep, so we are actually designing that as the program now. The reason why we identified Kairos PDX as that pre-K-5 learning lab, because I think it's really important for us to continue to work with our existing partners in education. Kairos PDX has a high population of Black and Brown students, and there is a unique approach that they are taking in their methodology towards educating Black and Brown children. And so what we believe is that we could design together a program where their school will serve as that lab school, if you will, where approaches will be tested, curated, and then shared outward with our own PPS teachers and staff across our PPS schools, with proven practices that will help for students to be deeply engaged in the type of learning that affirms their full culture, identity, and well-being. And so it is still again, a program that is in design. We are taking these incremental steps to put it together until we are able to, then embed it within a physical space.
I guess I'm still trying to, let's just take Boise, Elliott, Humboldt, or King. Nearby schools that serve a large number of Black students in elementary school as well. So would it be, here's what works at the lab school, and we're going to share that with these other schools, or is it going to be teachers at Kairos PDX going into these other schools and sharing? It's just, I'm trying to imagine how it get shared. And I guess then my other question is, I'm curious about why our PPS schools, just like, are there practices there that that should be curated and collected and shared across the district as well? So I'm trying to imagine how this works.
So we are in the process of designing just what that will look like, Director Brim Edwards, and I'll be happy to bring back more information as we continue to partner with PDX and our schools within the Albina area to curate exactly what the full design of it would be.
Great, I'll be looking forward to that. And then just another piece of a question I'd have. So Kairos is a K-5, and certainly where we see as students progress through middle school and high school, sort of the need for supports. Is there a plan to be curating sort of best practices at the middle and high school level, which I assume would be different or have to be different than the K-5 level?
Yeah, absolutely. But, in the notion of design thinking and innovation, we would want to start with a model and a test before we expand it outward. And so, again, these are part of the questions, and I appreciate your questions, because these are part of the questions that we will explore together and build out responses to as we design exactly what the full program can look like as a possibility, starting with pre-K-5, and then over time, envision what's possible.
Great, thank you. And then my last question is around, it's in slide 8, it's the affinity groups, which I love the focus because I know that gives students a place of belonging. There's just a reference, and maybe this is for Liz, that it talks about an administrative directive. Is that connected, sorry, this is kind of a technical question, is that connected to a policy, or is it just like a freestanding administrative directive?
I'm actually not, I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
we can get back to you on that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not really, and maybe that terminology we could massage a little bit. It's not really directed towards a policy at all. It really is looking at administratively how we will create standards for those following 3 points.
Okay, so it's using a term of art, but it's more of
Yeah.
a generic sense of, I guess, small a, small d.
Correct.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
If it's different, you can let me know. Great, thanks.
For sure, we will, and if there are any policy considerations, I think, another great space for us to continue the in-depth discussion of this would be Student Success Committee, and we could always look at that. But right now, as it is intended, it really is a small a, small d, to look at how administratively we can create standards for characteristics of what the, a representative and such would look like.
Great, thank you.
All right, any other questions?
Yeah, just thanks for mentioning the Student Success Committee. I was just thinking that at the same time. That's a great idea. I don't have any questions because pretty much all of them have been asked. I just want to acknowledge, make some appreciations. I'm really glad to see in the priorities about the digital infrastructure. I think it's a great idea. I mean, we have some systems in place, but it'd be nice to keep refining and having something that fills some holes there. So thank you for that. I would love, I'm not a lawyer, but I also love documents. So in just learning. So if you ever feel like you want to share your progress on that, I would love to hear about it. And also the best practices, I think, the advocate for adoption across the city. I think that's also something that's very much needed, and I'm glad that that's put in the priorities. So thank you.
Absolutely. And yes, I will happily share some of those documents once they're made.
All right, any other questions, comments? Director Green has joined us. You have any questions or comments?
No, I do not. Thank you much.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you both for sharing and presenting tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
First up tonight, we have, we're going to hear the progress of the implementation of the Climate Crisis Response Policy and to receive the annual report from the Climate Crisis Response Committee. Superintendent Dr. Armstrong, who will be presenting tonight?
Absolutely. Thank you again, Chair Hollins. Presenting tonight's update of the implementation of the Climate Crisis Response Policy is the Advisor for Climate Justice, Kat Davis.
That had an intro. Almost make you want to clap.
Thank you. I'm just getting my presentation geared up here. 1 moment. All right. Okay, perfect. Good evening, directors. Welcome, Dr. Armstrong. We're so excited to have you. Hi, General Counsel Liz. Good to see you all. My name is Kat Davis, and I'm the advisor for climate justice here at Portland Public Schools. My role is to oversee the implementation of our climate crisis response, climate justice, and sustainable practices policy. And per policy directive, I will be providing our annual update to the board and a high-level presentation accompanying a staff report that you all should have access to. So to get started, as a quick background to this work, this policy passed in March of 2022, so we've been in full implementation for 2 years, and it commits PPS to swiftly mobilizing resources to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and minimize negative environmental impacts, and as well as improving our schools' health and wellness, and building a culture of learning, responsibility, and sustainability centered on our values of racial equity and social justice, or climate justice, social justice. And I want to note that this policy came to being through deep collaborative work between the community, teachers, students, staff, and the board to make this happen. So we're really excited to be able to share our 2-year annual update today. So we all have a shared sense of language and are all speaking the same terms. What we're talking about with climate justice is understanding that climate change disproportionately impacts our most vulnerable members of our communities, and that in order for PPS to mobilize action around climate change or otherwise, we need to make sure that we're constantly centering and prioritizing serving people with disabilities, communities of color, and other vulnerable populations, making sure that our students, regardless of background or zip code or ability, can really envision a future of climate in which they're still thriving and still able to accomplish their goals. And this also, if we're doing it right, through a lens of climate justice, we should be advancing our graduate portrait and specifically advancing our mission of building out programs to create transformative racial equity leaders, influential and informed global stewards, and optimistic and future-oriented graduates. So one of the overarching goals of this policy is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And those goals specifically call out a goal to reduce our emissions by 50% of our 2018-2019 baseline by 2030, to reach net zero by 2040, and to phase out all of our fossil fuel infrastructure and equipment in new and existing buildings by 2050. So we have our first official data to be able to share from our progress on our greenhouse gas emissions reduction since this policy was passed. And that update is that we have reduced our emissions by 8% since the 2018-2019 baseline. I will note, of course, there is a little anomaly in that data because in the 2020-2021 school year, our schools were closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, so it's not really fair to hold us against that one. But from that first baseline year goal, we have reduced by 8%, which I want to take a moment to recognize and celebrate because that means what we're doing is working. We are making progress. We will need to expedite that progress to meet our 50% goal by 2030 in 6 years, but still being able to highlight the fact that progress has been made and we are seeing a visible impact in emissions is substantial and worth celebrating. In addition, we've decreased our emissions from fleet by 7.5%. So, exciting numbers to start out with. That's the greenhouse gas side of things. I also want to provide, so that's one part of the policy, and there's a whole other rest part of the policy that requires really robust strategic implementation in order to create pathways for students to have more equitable, empowering, engaging accesses to leadership in order to meet our goals of health and wellness in our communities despite a climate crisis. So with that, I will review some of the strategic progress towards the strategic directions that we highlighted last year in our annual report, because those really provided us an opportunity to see what kind of collective leadership needed to happen in order to move this policy forward holistically and equitably. And those strategic directions were to focus on coordinated and effective leadership, inclusive, collaborative, and data-driven decision-making, and to really focus on the strategic advocacy and allocation for resources. I also want to mention that last year our Climate Crisis Response Committee made recommendations to advance our policy progress as well, which include a call to continue to use and develop project management dashboard to provide more transparent accountability towards policy progress, to augment organizational leadership and development and accelerate a pace of implementation, and to enhance transparency in the work that we're doing. So all of that together really helped inform the infrastructure that was necessary for us to focus on in order to have long-term systems change. So some updates for each of those areas of work over the last year included to advance our coordinated and effective leadership goals. We launched a climate crisis staff advisory group, which consisted of about 40 project managers from departments across the district to provide a comprehensive understanding of activities related to the policy. We also continued to build out a climate crisis response policy and Visio dashboard, which is still being refined and in progress, and we're really excited to work with new leadership and our project managers to make sure that that tool is really accessible and usable by our community. So that area has really focused on mobilizing a district-wide approach to sharing updates on activities and metrics to better really communicate progress to the community and have a sense of accountability at all levels of the district. In addition, for inclusive, collaborative, and data-driven decision-making, we have put together a concerted effort to partner with a contracted group, Echo Northwest, to research best practices and meet with stakeholders of all different areas of the organization to really define and suggest key performance indicators and target outcomes for every policy goal. Because our greenhouse gas emissions have really clear targets and timelines associated with them, but the other 75 or so objectives of the policy do not have those. So we thought it was really important in order to provide clear and direct direction to our project managers and to be accountable to progress, to be able to actually have tangible goals. And the exciting thing about this policy is that it's the most ambitious policy in the nation for K-12, especially one that's really focused on justice. And there's examples from districts all over of pieces of it, but there is no one blueprint on how to track and implement the climate crisis response policy. That's what we've really been focused on this year. And in addition to that focus on collaborative and inclusive data-driven decision-making, the Climate Justice team and the Energy and Sustainability team partnered with the Innovation Studio and worked on a design team focused on co-creating pathways for student leadership and climate justice. So this scope of work worked with 20 different community organizations serving a variety of communities as well as teachers and students, and met with stakeholders from across the district to come up with best practices and recommendations to really build out an ecosystem of support for students that are trying to navigate and thrive within this world that they are living in. So we are excited to be able, our final design team meeting is tomorrow afternoon, so we're excited to be able to work on that scope over the summer and be able to share with you all the outcomes of that progress as well. And then finally, around our strategic advocacy and allocation of resources, we know that with these huge scopes of work comes huge investments, and we don't have the time or the resources to, try a lot and see what works. So we're really focused on trying to be as intentional with our resources as possible. And to do that, we have, back in September, the board approved funding for a contract to develop a decarbonization implementation roadmap. So this is providing a survey of 101 sites of 15 different efficiency measures in order to look at how to strategically implement and build out construction projects to increase equity and health and also reduce emissions, and really use our capital funds as strategically as possible. We're also partnering with Green Schools National Network to advance and highlight where students are already encountering climate justice teaching and learning across PPS, because we know we're also already leaders in a lot of ways of being able to provide the education to our students. Some of our teachers literally wrote the book on this. We are working with them to create a cohesive kind of climate justice curriculum roadmap that elevates the adopted curriculum and is in alignment with the instructional framework and kind of takes those best practices that you see happen at a variety of different schools here and there and makes it more of a common experience across the PPS experience for all of our students. So just, while the high-level strategic work is really cool, it's always really fun to talk about the stuff that's happening on the ground, the more visible stuff. So there's, like I said, over 75 objectives in this policy, and there's little celebrations and successes happening in each of these areas. So I just really want to make sure we hone in and celebrate the fact that, our community is vibrant and things happen here. So I'm going to pull out just a few that I thought would be kind of fun to share with you all. We have our continued LED light expansion, so we now have a total of 55 sites upgraded to energy-efficient LEDs, which really helps with that decarbonization curve. And also a fun update is that for the first year, we had 3 small electric buses on the road, and 4 more in the build process, where we're getting them on the road. We also have received funding for 4 more, as well as our contracted bus fleet for student received funding for 17 full-size buses to service PPS students. So all in all, at the end, by 2026, we will have 28 electric buses serving our students just from the efforts of this year. So that's really exciting to see that progress. In the realm of transportation as well, we've had 99 Safe Routes to School events this year and 72 programs happening. Around our health and wellness, we've completed our green schoolyard inventory of all 29 million square feet of our school grounds, and now we'll be able to really look at and prioritize and calculate not only the square footage of stormwater diversion, but really the thing that's exciting to me about this in health and wellness is that we can really calculate the benefit of heat reduction to the urban heat island effect by depaving areas and have a much more equitable approach to how we are trying to keep our school sites cool and vibrant. And on that note, the Portland Clean Energy Fund announced that PPS would be receiving $17 million of infrastructure funds in their climate investment plan. And part of the negotiations between PPS and PAT in the fall resulted in us dedicating at least $10 million of those funds to thermal comfort in this area, so of making sure that our schools are not only efficient, but also working to mitigate extreme heat and cold, because we know that that is a huge issue of climate resilience as well as climate justice considerations when we're thinking of health and wellness and student wellness and advancement in their classrooms. And then finally, just to focus on some student engagement and empowerment, PPS students are always doing amazing things. But just to highlight a few, there was the DSC Summit this year that serves to connect students and with district leadership and teach them about how to mobilize and advocate for their needs, and included a session around environmental justice, showing that the students are still really impassioned about this at the leadership level. There was also PPS Climate Solutions Fairs at 2 middle schools and a spring climate summit offered to high school students. So altogether, thousands of students were engaged this year, despite the challenges, and were in spaces that were vibrant and designed to really help create a feeling of agency and efficacy around climate action. So as we are looking ahead, I think it's important to continue to remember that in order to pursue this systems-wide climate action, we have to, consider this justice-centered approach. It needs to be balanced, balancing the urgency of the crisis with the integrity of the process. We need to make sure that we're responding swiftly, but we need to make sure we're not responding so swiftly that we have all these external consequences and we're not responding to the actual needs of our community. So that's where that strategic progress approach really comes into play. And it's also worth mentioning that between school closures and leadership transitions and budget cuts and all of these things happening this year, quite a few of our plans were pushed back. So all of those big strategic priorities you heard were ideally going to be wrapped up with a nice little bow by the time I was presenting here, but we made the intentional choice to take some more time over the summer and work with our new leadership team to really think about how to make sure that this work is done with integrity and honor the community and the stakeholders that were involved so that we can have something really exciting to present. So all that being said, we're also just excited to share that we're continuing to advocate for funding resources outside of our general fund. We're continuing to go after grants. it's still a challenge to have the capacity to go after all the grants available out there in climate justice and climate infrastructure, which is an exciting thing to say, that there's so much funding. And we get a lot of emails telling us how much funding there is, and we're really excited about that. But I wanted to just flag that that has been a challenge as well, is to try and use our resources as strategically as possible to go after the grants that are feeling the most competitive. So moving ahead, taking into consideration everything that has happened this year, we now have an idea of where all of this work exists across the at least central structure at PPS. We have a draft of our KPIs and target target outcomes. We have best practices for how to engage and support students. And now what we're really looking toward the future for is really prioritizing a phased approach to systemic integration of the policy goals, because we know things are happening because passionate people are doing passionate things, but how do we make this more embedded as part of a culture of PPS? So really looking at where we can strategically prioritize our efforts to really embed this work into our schools and make more transparent where this work exists and how it exists and how to get involved is something we're really eager to be able to work on over the next year. And part of that intentional embedding and integration of this policy scope includes focusing on intentional community feedback, as well as alignment of strategic priorities so that we can have a really proactive approach to planning. So all that said, thank you so much for your time today, and I'm available to answer any questions now or through follow-up. And then we also have our committee as well that is here to present their update.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions or accolades?
Accolades for sure. That's really a lot of work in 2 years. Really appreciate it. I was typing as I was listening, but I did hear LEDs at 55 sites. And do you have a way of, what do you use to determine where those go? I mean, is there like some base level of energy efficiency already with the building shell, or?
We have the wonderful Aaron Presburg here, and I'm going to bring him up.
Or is it just like, this is a closer school to get to, or, yeah, just curious what your methodology is for deciding where the LEDs are, what the sites are that get 100% LEDs.
Yeah, so we start with energy audits. So we're looking at, a handful of sites that we usually choose based on high energy usage, normalized by square foot, and then we're looking at Title I and underserved schools as well. And then from there, we're looking at what projects make the most sense, what has the highest payback, what's going to save us the most energy, and ultimately reduce the most greenhouse gas emissions.
That's a great answer. Thank you. I was listening for Title I, knowing that some of the kids with the highest economic needs usually get the worst buildings. So, and then it makes sense to determine based on energy use and return on investment as well. So, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Just some quick feedback. I'm really happy for the student component about this, because we are an educational institution. Just some feedback I heard from the ground. Hopefully this helps. One of the things that's really a real thing is climate anxiety, especially among our kids, among our youth, and I've heard from some teachers and a student just randomly talk about how these programs have really helped with that, because when it's focused on problem solving and solutions, it takes away that anxiety. It's pretty magical seeing that kind of feedback. The other thing is also like gardens. I live next to Woodstock, which has one, and it's not only affect the kids that have to deal with, the whole school benefits from it. I mean, my daughter always would check it every week and be like, hey, what's going on there? And same with all the students. I mean, it literally, figuratively is planting a seed in this interest in nature and the natural world. So thank you, and I hope that helps.
May I say something about that? I got something in the mail just recently, and it's from the Good Grief Network. Are you familiar with them?
I sure am. Yeah, they're wonderful. They're a great network, an organization. There's a couple great resources out there around climate anxiety, and that's something we really want to be able to provide for our students and teachers, and adults also deal with it of yes. Oh my gosh, what's happening? Especially if you look at, the news in itself is already very challenging, but just for instance, the heat wave that just happened a few days ago has been pretty challenging. Anyways, so yes, the Good Grief Network is a great support group.
And they, I just got a flyer that they're holding Train the Trainer sessions. So they want to train a core of youth program facilitators, teachers, wellness center staff, youth activists, and others interested. And the Train the Trainer will be held on three-hour sessions on Sundays in August. And I'd love to just pass this on to you. Maybe you know some youth or adults that would benefit.
Yes, please share all the resources. We appreciate it so much. That's great.
All right, any other, go ahead.
So thanks for the presentation. It's great to see 2 years in, all the progress has been made. I'm going to ask for the slides to go back because we didn't get the presentation. But to go back to the very beginning where it has the progress towards, because the policy had two main pieces, one being the net zero. And I'm wondering if the reduced by 8% since baseline year, which is great. I'm going to accelerate that to get to the half, but there's a separate call out for the emissions from fleet and transportation at 7.5. Is that being calculated separately, or is the 7.5 part of the 8%? And you just pulled it out for illustration purposes?
I can double check on that. I think that they're separate, but I think that it's included, but I'm not 100% sure. It would make sense that they would be included if we only.
And that's
reduced by
perfectly fine,
8%,
because I think it's an interesting point, because we did pull that out in the policy that transportation was a big contributor. And just, if you could follow up, just, I'm assuming it's part of that?
Yeah, I think it is, but I can double check.
And then just staying on this part of the policy of the getting to a 50% reduction by 2030, the mapping that happened this year, do we have a glide path to the 50% reduction? Or do we need to take more actions to accelerate?
Yeah, we would need to significantly increase the investment in the work being done.
And the investments in what? Is that what the map will say, exactly like where we need to increase?
Yeah. It won't tell you like exactly, or it'll tell you like how quick you need to do it and also in what order, but it's going to be a flexible tool, right? So we're gonna have this plan that's going to say, if you start today and you keep on this track, here's what you need to implement to get to the goals. And that's both the 50% goal and the net zero goal, and also the electrification goal by 2050. So we'll lay that out, but we know that things are going to change, priorities are going to change, funding is going to change, construction trends are going to change. So it's going to be a flexible tool at our disposal to shift as we go through the years towards our goals and figure out how we need to pivot.
And if we continued on the path that we're on without major shifts, where will we be in 2030? Do we know that?
Not at 50%. Yeah. Not without increased investment. I don't know the exact number. But are you saying if we continue on the current trend?
Well, I'm just assuming the 8% is not going to be an 8% year over year, so I'm just curious. And then I'm curious about what the gap would be between where our target and because that target was, as you know, super student-driven to really be aggressive. And so I'm just wondering if we're on a trend to be at like 33% in 2030, like what steps would we need to take or could we take to accelerate it to 50%? Is that what the mapping would tell us?
It's going to lay it out like, what we need to do in order to get there, and that's going to help us plan what we need to implement to meet the goal. The roadmap is still in progress right now, so we don't have it complete yet. It's scheduled to be done in September. But yes, you're right that will tell us exactly what needs to be done. If you follow this formula and these projects, and you stay on target and on schedule and all these things, like you will meet the goal by that date.
Great, that'll be amazing to have access to that. And this is kind of technical question, but I'm curious, of the 8% reduction, there was a conversation in the committee at the time that we'll get reductions in our admissions because actually the utilities that we use, they'll have cleaner energy, and therefore, like, we get credit for that. How much of the 8% is because the utilities are doing something that we don't have any control over, but it benefits us?
Yeah, so there's two ways, and that statement is true on the electric side, but not on the gas side.
Right.
So we actually used more electricity last fiscal year than we did in our baseline year, but our emissions were a little bit lower because the grid is being cleaned up a little bit. So theoretically, by 2040, if the grid is 100% generated by renewable energy, we can use X amount of kilowatt hours of electricity and be, net zero for electricity. So that's the goal. That's why electrification is such a big part of decarbonization, because we need to factor in renewable energy. We need to factor in energy efficiency, of course. But the further we electrify, the more we're able to decarbonize outright. So there is a little bit of that going on. I don't know the exact number. I can go and do some calculations and get you some data on that. But there definitely is a factor of the utility on the electric side working in our favor there to help us decarbonize.
Great. And then I think the last point, there was a lot of great, I love the sort of ground level, classroom level examples. And is that all inventoried somewhere where we could see it? And so that's one question. Then I have a question about one of the specific things you raised.
We are working on what that would look like, to have a way of capturing, because even what I shared is still, a lot of which is still central office-led initiatives that are implemented on the ground, but each school site has amazing things happening. So that's something that we really want to create is our Invisio dashboard will have activities happening to advance the integration of our policy goals, which is really exciting and important to look at. And then we also want to have some kind of like story mapping or way of being able to see what activities are happening. But it also takes the coordination and the resources and the staffing to actually like go get that from all of our school sites. But there is such an abundance happening around. I mean, climate change is really, the language of climate change is really focused on scarcity so many times. And I think it's so important for that climate anxiety to focus on the abundance of what is happening and use that energy to get people excited. So that's something that we've been wanting to look at coordinating for a while, and I think could be, especially with the student projects of the PSEF grant next year, could be a great way to start that on the ground, the practice of cultivating these stories.
Great. And then just one specific example. One of the things the students really wanted in the policy was something around reusable utensils and cafeteria. Yes. So I'm curious, it was listed as one of the sort of bullet points. Is there a district-wide effort to do that? Because the students were like, we want some things that we can tangibly do. It's great that Aaron and Kat and all you guys here centrally are doing some like big picture stuff, but like what can we do in our school? And so like that was one of them. The other like recyclable bins. Is that a district-wide, like we're trying to move to that so that at every school students would have that, or the ability to do it? Or is it, hey, there's a lot of energy at Bridger or whatever, around, different schools that's what they've decided to do versus the district saying we are getting rid of like plastic utensils and basically non-sustainable cafeteria products?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know that through Nutrition Services, we have been actively implementing trays and reusable serviceware at different school sites. I believe that some of the conditions that are necessary for that to happen are having a dishwasher available, or the staff and the time to be able to wash those dishes, or if the students leave campus with their food, like at high schools, that can be really challenging. But I could see an opportunity for students to be able to implement their own, practice of getting a campaign around reusable to-go like utensils that they get in the habit of using, or bringing your Tupperware, which is just a great thing we should all get in the practice of doing, because you never know when there's going to be food. But just like things like that, where they could really, where you could really implement some ground level things that the students could be advocating for that might be able to help meet some of those barriers halfway. From that district side perspective, if that helps make sense. And there's some like constraining factors around things like compost in the front of house because of our composting zoning and stuff like that. But those are all things that we from the central office side of things can try and help navigate. And what we're really hoping to create the foundation for is for students to be able to get these ideas and take those project ideas and run with them. And be able to also have ownership over the handing off of that project. So if it is a reusables campaign or a reusable party kit is something that our partner EcoSchools Network provides for K-5 classrooms. So there's like a central party kit where you can rent it out and wash the dishes and things like that. Being able to look at what how to help students create those programs and hand them off year after year is kind of a neat opportunity and a learning experience. So I think like I said, the PSEF student funds will create a space for us to be able to engage together to look at how that looks from a pilot project that students are excited about, and how to make that more accessible to other schools, and like vice versa. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but it's a good thing to like be trying to think through.
It gave me a lot of information.
Yeah.
But if it'd be possible to find out like what things are standardized, and I understand like some things that maybe aren't standardized or not yet, but like
standardized. Yeah.
Is there things that are happening at every school, or maybe happening at every elementary school? Just on that specific topic would be helpful.
Yeah. To answer your question about the durables, like Kat said, there are barriers, mostly kitchens not having dishwashers. So that's, we have the durables. We actually have, our nutrition services department has them able to deploy to every school. We just don't have the infrastructure in the kitchens to effectively make those systems work yet. So it's kind of chicken before the egg kind of thing.
And then other things that are required, schools have a lot of autonomy in purchasing, and so there's some challenges to having like district-wide purchasing standards around paper even, where we want to make sure that schools that have limited budgets have autonomy in how they use those budgets, and so that's some of the challenge to trying to like centralize things, but I can certainly continue to investigate what things are district-wide and standardized, or in the process of being standardized, like the reusable trays and utensils, or what things are going to be still more up to the school site to figure out how it fits in with the culture of that particular site and how they'd want to manage it.
That would be helpful. And then the last question I had was...
3 last questions.
Pardon?
That's 3 last questions.
Okay.
So we're going to make this be the last one.
Okay. Well, it's, we get one report.
I hear you.
There was discussion when the policy was formulated about having a sustainable like procurement catalog, that while schools had the opportunity to order, like they had the autonomy to order, but that they would actually have a place where they could order sustainable products. Has that happened, or?
I haven't seen that in the policy, so I wasn't aware of that discussion, but it sounds really cool, so I would love to investigate what that could look like. But.
All right. Any other questions?
I have one. Just one.
Yep, go ahead.
You mentioned at the first something about project managers going out, and I'm just wondering, who are the project managers? Are they teachers, students, staff?
Are you talking about the staff advisory group that I mentioned, where we got together some staff?
I don't know. You just mentioned
Yeah.
I think you said our project managers went out and something.
I think it was the stuff.
Yeah, so what I was referring to there was for our coordinated and effective leadership approach, we have staff that manage a variety of projects related to the climate crisis response policy in the Office of Teaching and Learning, or sustainability, or transportation, or risk management. That's what I meant by project managers.
Okay.
Not within different departments that came together. So it was an interdepartmental, interdisciplinary approach to understanding what different activities were happening throughout the year. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I brushed over that very quickly, so that was a good question.
All right. Director Green, do you have any questions? Okay, hearing none. I have one question. You mentioned about additional grant funding. What is holding you guys? What is holding us back from obtaining additional grant funds?
At this point, it's just staff capacity to apply for the grant funds. Some of the grants that are out there are federal, great amount of money, or even otherwise. Like I think it's really just staff capacity and the technical expertise within the staff that have limited capacity. So, like I said, we went after quite a few grants this year, but there's always so much more that are coming out that it's just hard to see when we are trying to do all of this work as well as go after those grants, if that makes sense. So, yeah. So lots of opportunity out there, though, and something we're going to continue to try and work on with our scope and capacity to make time for.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. So next, we have Director Brent Medworth, who is the board liaison to the Climate Crisis Response Committee. Would you like to introduce this next item?
Sure. Thanks, Chair Hollins. So as part of the policy, there is the creation of the Climate Crisis Response Committee, and their job is to monitor effective implementation, transparency, and tracking of progress. It's made up of no more than 9 people, with the majority being members who identify as people of color and 2 members who are current PPS students. The boards approved their charter and the membership of the committee. And as part of that, there is a requirement that they annually come present to the board, sort of the progress and their findings and a set of recommendations. And just having seen this committee at work and frankly being on their email strings, this is a very hardworking committee that's doing a great job, I think, at working with, like, finding the balance of like working with staff, but also providing sort of that oversight and independent look at the district's work. So with that, I have in my notes that it's Charity Finn, but I see we're going to get a 2 times presentation. So please come forward, and thank you for all the work that you've done this year and working closely with staff on the implementation of the policy.
Hi. Yes, my name is Charity Fain, and I'm currently the chair of the committee. Just a little context, I have 2 kids at Sunnyside Environmental School, or one just finished. And I bring that up because that is a school that has racial and climate justice integrated into its curriculum. So I've been privileged to see what that impact is on a school, on a K-8, and how important that kind of curriculum is for the children and for learning. In my day job, I'm also executive director at a climate justice organization. So this topic and this work is really important to me and to everyone on the committee. So yeah, we do put in our work, or we try to. And I'm just going to give a little bit of summary of what's in the report, and then Diego, my colleague, will talk about from the student's perspective. As you heard from Kat, there has been a lot of progress in the last 2 years. And the committee wanted to note, specifically call out the project management dashboard. As she also mentioned, like, transparency is really important for us, so that the broader community can see what this really broad policy is and how it's going to be implemented, and that is made accessible. We also saw progress around the evaluation plan that she mentioned that Echo Northwest is pulling out to identify KPIs for tracking the goals and targets around the policy within that dashboard. And then finally, the decarbonization plan led by PAE Consultants, that it's underway. I think we would have all, like Kat said, liked to have seen it finished already, but we want to recognize the work and progress that's been made so far. Saying that, you also saw the numbers about where we are towards the GHG reduction goals. So the committee wants to call out that the current pace is not adequate. And it's a little bit concerning to us because we called that out last year as well. So, we acknowledge as a committee that this was an unusual year. There were disruptions that impacted what staff were able to do, but we feel like, the data that she presented on where we are on track already shows that we really hope that in the next year that we can really see an uptick in progress and pace. And towards that, we have 4 main recommendations. One is that, again, around the dashboard, that is made up on the website by fall 2024 so that we can really have a transparency and that it can be used as a tool for community engagement more broadly around the entire policy implementation. And then, as Kat said, the committee has really we see the hard work this team is doing and how much work that she is and her team is putting in, but acknowledge that even in this climate, it's not adequate staffing for the broad scope of this policy and the amount of work that's going to happen in the next few years. It's not that many years until, right, we're at our 50% goal. And the lift that will be required to reach that is beyond what, one person can manage. Then also around that, there are funding opportunities, like there's a green bank being set up, right? There's many opportunities through the Inflation Reduction Act. PSEF's 10 million or 19 million is great. We know that's a drop in the bucket, right? So being able to have somebody that can really focus on those opportunities while they're here now. These kind of opportunities are not going to be here forever. Like my organization, we are all organizing to capitalize on these major federal investments that are happening now. And I'll just say, for example, I was a reviewer last year on a DOE school grant. There's resources here that could help the district, and we have to be applying for these grants and having additional capacity to make sure that those grants can be applied for. And I know they're hard because we're doing them, and the technical side of complying for those is very difficult. The work that's gone on the last 2 years will make some of that application process easier because you will have real details about what to put into that. But really more aggressively taking an approach to capitalize on those opportunities right now is really vital, and the committee really wanted to stress that. And then I'm going to turn to Diego to introduce himself and talk about the 4th goal around student opportunities and what the student effort has been this year.
Yeah, so I'm Diego Romero. I'm a student representative on the Climate Crisis Response Committee, and along with my other student representative, Tess Nessel, we created student reports for our CCRC meetings, and we wanted to add a summary to our report. As student representatives, we surveyed 30 high school students at a district leadership conference, including representatives from all high schools in the district, and compiled some general student attitudes towards climate action from our experiences among our peers. We hope that the concerns and experiences of students remain a central focus in the implementation of PPS climate policy. From the survey, students reported that climate change is a very pressing issue in their lives. In particular, they reported on how climate change affects their daily life at school, citing examples ranging from dealing with uncomfortable classroom temperatures to missing school entirely due to snow days. With the ever-increasing impact of climate change on students' lives and the influx of unsettling information about climate change, these issues can seem daunting to students. In addition to this, for the students who are looking to get involved, students can oftentimes struggle with finding where to start and where to get involved with climate-related opportunities. To help address these issues, we see it as essential to find more ways to reach students about climate-related opportunities and what PPS is doing to address climate change, while explaining the pre-existing pathways for students to get involved. Not only are students ready to engage with climate advocacy, they're also bringing their own ideas as well. In the survey, students offered ideas ranging from creating more school gardens to remodeling buildings and implementing more effective and energy-efficient AC systems.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions, comments from the board? All right.
Just want to thank you as volunteers for doing this work. You know, it's really important, and Charity, I know, I just remembered how I came across your name today. It was through Community Energy Project's testimony. So I know you guys advocate for energy efficiency measures for seniors and low-income people, and just want to commend you for that work, but also just for your volunteer time, because you could be doing so many other things, especially on a beautiful night like tonight. So thanks for showing up.
Thank you. Good.
Diego, are you cycling off this year, or do you have another year?
I graduated.
Oh, okay, so
He's a
that's
graduate and still showed up tonight.
yeah, super extra points. Thank you. So I appreciate you sharing what the survey shared, but as you depart from PPS, and congratulations, do you have any sort of reflections or charge to all of us of what you think we should do, or the committee could do, or the district could do differently?
I guess differently, like with regards to what exactly? Sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Could you repeat the question? I guess what do you want?
Just as you head out and you've finished up your term, is there anything that you want to charge us with, or really emphasize that we need to focus on or do differently? You can give the unsanitized recommendation. This is just your own personal reflection.
Yeah, I would say, I definitely come from a place of privilege. Going to Lincoln High School, there's a lot of resources. And, thankfully I was able to find ways to get involved with climate advocacy. But one of the things that I noted, and also along with my peers from Lincoln High School, when it comes to getting involved with climate advocacy, most of the students are coming from schools like Lincoln and Grant and Ida B. Wells, and places where there's a lot more funding. And so I think really making it a priority to get all Lincoln High Schools involved as well is really important.
Great. Thank you.
That's great.
That's great.
Absolutely, that.
So when you talk about we need more time, sorry, to write grants, you sound like you're thinking we should hire somebody who could just spend their time writing grants? Can you?
For right now, yeah. This is an unprecedented time in the clean energy world with the funding available. And if you don't get it, other schools across the entire country are getting the funds. Or, it's just unprecedented. And it's not, we're probably not going to have another Inflation Reduction Act. We're probably not going to have these funds, coming up again. It was a heavy lift to get those kinds of things passed. So yes, that is an investment in funding this work, an investment in the schools, investment in our community is an investment that's worth it. To access much, much, much larger pools of money. I guess we're going to have to go out to the community eventually to ask for money to upgrade buildings. The buildings are going to cost a lot of money. The scale of the buildings cost is enormous, right? My organization spends about $55,000 a house right now just for a single family home, right? Not just one small house. This decarbonization is expensive, and it is needed because of years of lack of investment, right? Years, as right? So where we have an opportunity right now for these amazing funding, let's get it. Other schools across the country are getting the funds. Let's find a way to be competitive and access those funds. I spent all day today at the DEQ meeting setting up the climate protection plan. That money is going to roll out, right? There's just local, state, and having a real good strategy on how to access that money is worth an investment from the district even in a time when I know you have to make horrible choices right now about staffing. And the committee took that very seriously, but the opportunity right now on that kind of investment and what it can turn into is just too big to pass because we didn't apply.
Yeah.
I can speak to that. One of my jobs at my day job is to source those grants from the EPA. There's 2 tracks, the community change grants, and there's so much money on the table right now. It would be worth it. You do have to have the capacity to.
Yes.
It takes. I mean, we don't even have the capacity at my job to do it. I know that we do apply for federal funds here, and but it does require investment in staff that knows what they're doing. But we're like talking 20 to 30, $20 to $30 million in track 1, or I'm sorry, track 2, and 2 to 5 million in track. Can't get the tracks mixed up yet, but
yeah, I'm applying for that grant too. So
yeah, there's a lot of money.
Yeah,
but it will take staff to write the grants.
Yeah.
Can you write the grant and part of it be to pay the staff person who wrote the grant?
Oh,
Yes.
absolutely. You should always put staffing into your grant plan and admin.
Yeah. So thank you, and I agree 100%. You know, I was actually part of that DEQ carbon emission. Oh gosh, back in about 5 or 6 years ago, where they really paid 50% of a brand new truck. And it was great for us because we was able to get like almost a brand new fleet of trucks. But, you know, those, when you talk about those monies and stuff where it's out there and they're not lasting forever, absolutely. And building in staffing to get those money is definitely going to be a better ROI than what we spend on outside as far as other stuff. So absolutely, I think it's 100% worth it. It pays for itself 10 times over. And we was a small company applying for these grants, but we went in with other bigger companies that did them. Mm-hmm. And the money out there is literally millions of dollars. Millions of dollars that's coming from this stuff. So either somebody's going to get it, and whether it's us or not, that's just for us to determine. So, thank you.
Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you for having us.
All right. Our final topic of the evening is to discuss the timing and next steps to pursue a general obligation bond measure. Last week, staff provided a memo that identifies the impact and risk of moving the planned voter approval of the next general obligation bond from November to May. Our purpose tonight is to discuss the staff recommendation to move the planned voter request to May 2025 in order to allow time to gather detailed information, community feedback, to modify scopes, and to give staff directions on next steps. So, Mr. Dan Young, Chief of Operating, will be presenting.
Good evening. Thank you, Dan Young, Chief Operating Officer. So as everybody knows, the district has been targeting November of 24 for the next general obligation bond election for years and has been actively planning with staff and with board input for several months. It's been a unique year. I won't repeat anything else. And so I think it's fair to say that ideally we'd be further along in some of our planning efforts at the end of June than where we are right now. At the May 31st Facilities and Operations Committee, Director Brim Edwards brought up the topic of potentially changing the election date from November of 24 to May of 25 and asked for an opportunity to have that discussion with the full board. So therefore, in the materials tonight is a short memo that specifically addresses of what the impacts would be moving from November to May. There are a number of efforts and projects that are funded by multiple bonds and that are underway right now. And so one question we want to answer was, if there was a delay, what would that do to those current efforts? The modernizations are a big piece that are underway. all of those projects have sufficient funding, that the election could move 6 months without any impediments to those projects. They'd move forward as is. The two efforts that would need additional funding are the planning implementation of the ERP and the curriculum adoption that is continual and rolling annual effort. The memo notes that we think there are options to effectively float, for lack of a better word, that work until a bond went forward in May of '25. And so the staff recommendation to allow more time to plan, to get community feedback in particular is something that we're lacking right now to help shape this bond. We think it's prudent to move to May of '25.
All right. So what we're going to do is, with this scene, Frankie gets on, which was our student director. Michelle had to leave. Director DePass had to leave. She's actually on the phone as well. So I think I'm going to start with my left, because we always pick on Director Wong all the time as far as going first. Anybody have any questions around moving this GO bond from November to May of '25?
I just wondered if you had any more information about whether we'd have that OSCIM program if we waited until May.
Thank you for that question. It was in my notes to update that. Yes, we did confirm with the state. So PPS is eligible still to apply for that grant in both May of next year and November of the following year, and potentially further than that, but we've confirmed we've got a full year. Thank you.
Okay, so that also brings up, if it didn't pass in May, we could go the next November?
And we would still be eligible for that grant program. Yes, correct.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Do we have a rough estimate of how much is left on the ERP project that we need to ask for in the next bond?
We do. I don't have the number at my fingertips. It's in the materials. It's not just the one that I have in front of me, so I can get that to you.
And I guess
the total amount.
Total amount left. I know we funded some with the last bond, the preparation, and I'm just curious what the total amount left is. And then I guess I just want to note, and you sort of note this in your memo, I mean, the risk here, right, is that if the bond fails, right, we continue to move forward with the project and floating some funding, and then obviously we would need to put a pause on that while we figure out what comes next.
Correct.
I guess that risk already exists if the bond doesn't pass, whether we sort of floating it increases the risk marginally, but not significantly.
Agreed. Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
And then I think the only other thing I would note, just sort of for public record, is that neither Wells nor Cleveland construction schedule would be impacted by moving to May. I know it's a question the community has had. Just sort of putting it out there. My understanding from staff, and you can affirm this, is that the current, if we were to go in November, go in May, wouldn't impact those overall construction schedules.
Correct. Both those projects have $20 million of funding from the 2020 bond. They're both in very early design. They have roughly 2 years of design, so that work can continue unimpeded.
Great. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Just really quick. This goes for anybody. Is there, because voter turnout is higher in November typically, right? Is there an advantage electorally between November and May? Just curious, because I agree with all this and this is great, but just out of curiosity, is there electoral disadvantage from going into May instead?
I could answer that.
Yeah.
It's better for us to go when we're ready and we have a package that we know will be successful at the ballot box. I think we could win with either scenario, but we'd have to be ready. And this gets into just more the discussion about the dates, but I don't think we're ready this November to run a campaign. I would also say that while you have a different electorate in November, it's also way more expensive because you've got more voters you need to reach, and given what's going to be on the ballot this fall, where you have 100 city council candidates, I mean, there's having somebody who lives in Earl Blumenauer's district, the amount of mail in the last primary, and that was just one contested race, created a lot of noise. And so even when that one very cute animal came in from the Metro Zoo Bond, it was memorable, but then there was just a flood of everything else. So, I mean, there's a downside to that too, but I think the
I
bigger...
just need to know for the record, I'm staff and had nothing to do with the mailing.
I learned a new word, whatever it is when an animal sticks their tongue out. But there's a name for it.
It's not death?
This is the zoo director.
Anyway, I think the bigger issue is which election will we be, all other things being equal and not having an impact on the projects, which election are we better ready to run a bond campaign, which will be a much bigger lift than a local option campaign. You're also just competing for, like, people have a limited amount of campaign dollars, and, I mean, plus you've got a presidential election. I mean, it's going to be noisy in November.
I think that kind of gets at the crux of the question, like whether we're ready or not. It still sounds like May would be a better option anyway, just based on the current political climate that we're dealing with right now.
There's sort of two pieces to being ready. There's the whole staff piece and the capacity to get a package ready, which takes a lot of time. I'm just having served on the 2016 Bond Stakeholder Advisory Group, just the whole community process that happened that led to the recommendation to the superintendent from the community, then the superintendent to the board. So that's one piece. But then to run a campaign of this, depending on the size of the bond, raising anywhere between $700,000 and $1 million for a pretty substantial campaign will take a much longer runway than a local option. And it's just a different set of entities that you raise money from and everything else.
All right. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
If I can answer one question, it's $38 million is the answer on the ERP ask that's planned for the next bond to finish the ERP. Yeah, correct.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have anyone?
I had
okay.
one question, and it was about, Andrew asked one of the questions about Ida B. Wells and Cleveland, but what about Jefferson in the scenario that has us going in May, which I'm in favor of?
In Jefferson, as well as planning efforts for the CBSE, those have funding, and they have enough funding to continue to go into May without any impacts to their schedule.
Thank you. That was my question.
So I guess I'd offer one other recent example is from the 2017 bond. The district ended up short for a variety of reasons we don't need to go into, but essentially the last modernization project in the series between McDaniels, Lincoln, Kellogg, and the last one was Benson, and there wasn't enough to complete the project. And using the proceeds of the 2017 bonds, so there was a lot of anxiety about letting the other schools go first, knowing that Benson was going to go last and it wasn't going to have enough resources when a lot of the bond had been sold on the Benson modernization. And so there was a commitment from the board, I think it was in a resolution, that if for some reason we never passed another bond that would pay for the remaining amount, I think it was 190. No, that's the Jefferson amount. It was substantial, somewhere between 100 and 200 million, that we would issue, I forget, certificates of participation or some sort of bridge funding until we eventually got a bond passed so that the high school could be completed. Do I have that essentially right, Dan?
Yeah, my recall is not that good, but yes, essentially I think that was.
Which we didn't end up needing to use because we got the 2020 bond, which paid for the second half of the Benson bond. But it gave some assurance to the Benson community that they weren't going to be like, you got to go pass another bond, otherwise you're going to have a half a high school. So I would assume we'd be in a similar position with Jefferson if we got to that point.
I'm happy to go back and look and see exactly what that language was and share it with the full board.
It's not a certificate of participation, it was something like that. It was a Carol Samuel term, but we passed a resolution because we had a board member who, another Benson alum. But I think that was our assurance to the community, like, we can let these other projects go ahead. You don't need to block them. We can let them go ahead because we are going to commit to finishing Benson regardless.
All right, any other questions from either Director Green or Director DePass or Student Director Silverstein?
Nope. I have no questions, Gary. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
All right, so I'm guessing you're looking for some direction, so if we can kind of give a head nod or a thumbs up to moving it from from November till May of 25. Does that sound reasonable for everyone? Patty, Andrew? Yeah. All right, sound like you got direction.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other board business? All right, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.